Okay, good morning, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to this discussion with the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Bonnie Politz. I'm an independent community and youth strategy consultant in Washington, D.C., my hometown, where it's a sort of rainy, cool, gray day, but not too wintry, which was great. And Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Hernandez. I'm the youth advisor for the YSSCOP. I'm located in El Salvador, in the central of America, and today the weather is very hot. So if you wish to have some heat and some hot weather in some beautiful beaches, you can come to El Salvador. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome. So we wanted to do we did our brief little introductions of who we are. We want to just do a little quick mini refresher. This is our first gathering in this year for the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. We're going to be focusing on youth and governance with Mantate Queeneth and Mike Hernandez. We're going to do some rapid networking because this is more like a cafe than a regular webinar. And then we'll talk about what's coming up in the Learning Network. I'm just going to take a minute and just remind people that this Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice is an open learning and sharing space for participants. We really want people to understand more about what's happening globally, about the purposes, the processes, and the results associated with reforming systems that impact young people, everywhere from education to health, to criminal justice, to workforce development, democracy and governance, any system. We're focusing on trying to learn more about that. And the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice uses a framework that has been created by the Youth Systems Collaborative, which on the next slide, when we get to it, you will see the members of it. But we are an independent community of global practitioners. We're trying to advance learning and strategies that promote comprehensive systems change that will result in positive outcomes for young people. And over time, we have had support to create this framework, which has been tested out by various organizations by telling stories about what's going on through their work. And we feel these are the essential elements to really make the kinds of systems change that we're talking about. And in our conversation today with Mantate, we're going to be focusing on the capacity development angle of that, the norms and mindsets, and some changes in policy and services and practices from the work that she's doing. So we can go into the next slide. And the members of our Youth Systems Collaborative who have created that framework and where we're still working together, we've been together for almost 7 years now, are these organizations, and you may know a lot of them from looking at the logos. It's a very dynamic, interactive group that's coming together while competitive, also really working together to try and really deepen our knowledge about systems change impacting young people. So we'll go into the next slide. I'm now going to hand this over to my wonderful colleague and co-facilitator, Mike Hernandez, who will lead us into discussion with Mantate. Mike?
All right, so please feel free to drop all your questions or comments in the chat, or if you want to share your thoughts, you can open up the microphone, lift your hand, and we'll give you access to talk and share with us. But today I have the pleasure to introduce Mantate Mlotshwa, right? If you correct me, please, Mantate. I'm very happy to be with her and to share what she's doing. Mantate is from Zimbabwe, and she's a program design and development consultant, currently serving as the Global Communications Officer in the IRI Generation Democracy Global Member Advisory Board. She's also a producer and co-host of the Resistance Bureau and recently got accepted into a Master's of Science in African Studies at the University of Oxford. Mantate, thanks for joining us today. And it's going to be a pleasure to listen and to learn from you, what you're doing, what you have been active in your communities, in your countries. And please welcome everybody, Mantate. Mantate, all the session is yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm very, very excited. I feel like I've been excited about this space for the last 30 days or so, which is great for me because I've looked at it as an opportunity to just highlight some of the ways in which I, as a young person, managed to go through processes that built my capacity to now be the person that's building the capacity of other young people to meaningfully engage as well as contribute to democracy and governance systems in my country. So I'm going to focus today on two core programs that I've been doing, especially recently in the last year. I've been going heavy on these particular programs. The other one as well is one that I went through like 9 years ago, so which is strange. It feels like I'm growing so fast, but I went through this program 9 years ago, and I'm just looking at the person that I am now, and I feel like it's a great space to reflect because it made me, but it also shows the model of capacity building that could potentially make other young people. So the first thing I obviously want to say is the fact that youth participation is a big thing in Africa. It's a big thing in Zimbabwe. It's a big thing for me. And the reason why it is because, first of all, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. You know, we say this a lot, it's almost cliche, but that's what it is. We are the youngest continent in the world. And in the next couple of decades, we will continue to be the youngest continent. What that means is that young people are going to be the most affected by everything that happens in our country, by everything that happens in the continent, by also global politics as well. So what that means is that we need to ensure that young people have the necessary capacity, that society understands the role that young people can play, but that all of that together can begin to effectively influence the systems of governance so that our economy, our social spaces, our politics become more conducive for growth and development in the continent. So that's kind of the introduction, but I'll start with the first program, which is the child governance system that is there in Zim right now. So
I want to ask you a question. Mantate.
Yeah,
If I say the word youth, what comes to your mind? And please feel free to share your coffee with us also. When I say the word youth, what does it mean for you? What does word refers to when you with your whole experience and your projects? What is youth for you?
I'd say two things. The first thing that comes to my mind is the future. You know, the future is young. Like I already said, like we are the future, and the future that we're talking about is not just tomorrow, but we're also looking at today being the future that we spoke about yesterday. So when I think of young people, I'm thinking of the people that have the responsibility to ensure that the future we're creating today is the kind of future that is sustainable for the continent as well as for the world we're in. And the second part of my view of young people would be a quote by one of the most prominent people that we once had in Zimbabwe, Joshua Mkabu. He said that the world, you know, like the world will not die, Zimbabwe will not die, young people will save it. So for me, when I think about young people, I'm thinking about the people that have the necessary skills, the energy, the resources, the innovation that if given the space and the platforms to grow, they can begin to influence the kind of, you know, change that we want to see in the world. So that's my view of young people.
Super. What about the junior parliament? Tell us something about that.
Yeah, so the junior parliament of Zimbabwe is basically a recognized structure within the government, and it mirrors the senior parliament, with each constituency that we have in Zimbabwe having a parliamentary representative. So it was started in 1991 as a move by the government to effectively engage children in policy processes. So it's basically the official platform or the official forum for young people, for children to be engaged in matters that affect them. And a greater part of the work of junior parliament is basically giving young people, students, young children, a platform to know about their rights, a platform to begin to advocate for the things that they want, and a platform to begin to speak about their aspirations. So basically, in the same way that a member of parliament from my community, or a councillor from your community, or a president, like a senior president, would come in representing the interests of a country, this same platform actually works in the same way. We've got a child president, we've got child ministers, we've got, you know, members of parliament, the Senate, we've got like a whole range of young people that represent a shadow of the senior government. And basically the idea is, in as much as those young people do not influence policy, or in as much as they don't make the law in the way that senior parliament does, the idea behind it really is, how do we begin to enable young children to begin to see what governance looks like? So they begin to understand parliamentary processes, they begin to understand issues of rights as well. So yeah, it's that platform where you begin to expose young people to what governance looks like. And there's also a similar model at provincial, local levels, which is called junior councils. So Zimbabwe has the national government, which is made up of parliament, and then at provincial level, city level, we've got the city councils. So it basically works the same way, but it's just a decentralized form of youth capacity development. And I want to mention something about this junior parliament and say that it's not just about, being an outspoken young person, because I think a lot of young people that get into it, also the recruitment is basically based on your ability to speak. But I think beyond just the ability to speak as a young person, it's that space where you begin to see kids that are very passionate about issues, but they don't know necessarily that they're future activists, the future parliamentarians and things like that, but they're very passionate about these issues and they're finding that platform to come in and express themselves. And I think this is very important because in our constitution in Zimbabwe, the African Union as well, and also if you look at the United Nations, for example, they all push for this idea that any child that has the ability, the capacity to form their own ideas and opinions should be given the space to actually express themselves. So I think it's for me, it's such a powerful platform. And I think in Zimbabwe, we did very well by having it so long ago, but also kind of keeping it running and learning through the years to say, how do we begin to realize that idea of young people or children beginning to air their opinions, begin to, when I see something in my school or in my constituency as a young person, as a student, how do I begin to come up and speak about the fact that child hasn't been eating in school for the last couple of weeks, or that child hasn't paid fees for the entire year, or that child doesn't have sanitary pads, or, all of the small things that we see every day as young people. So junior parliament, junior council then allows those young people that are taking responsibility for, change in their community to begin to amplify the experiences of other young people and begin to advocate better,
Mantate, has any of these participants run for office or got elected?
Sorry?
Have any of these participants run for office or they have got elected?
Well, we've had a good number of people that have gone to mainstream politics and taken over as members of parliament as well. There's actually a young woman. She was one of the youngest female parliamentarians in the 2018 election, which is our last election. Her name is Tatenda Mavetera. And she actually recently also presided over a delimitation report review in parliament. And she did it so well. And I think she's just one example of a young person that a good number of years ago was in junior parliament, but also now is in politics. But it's not just politics as well. You're looking at civil society as well. There's this particular Zimbabwean, his name is Ivan Mawarire, and he started this powerful protest movement back in 2016, which is called This Flag, #This Flag movement. So basically this campaign was basically based on the idea of the Zimbabwean identity. What does it mean for us? And he was using the flag, and he started this really big thing. He was in parliament before, and now he's standing up to a government that is not progressing us and saying, I want this. So it's young people that have grown on to take up space in civil society, in media, in government, and not just in Zimbabwe, but you're looking at the African Union as well, the SADC, the United Nations. It's great platforms. It's Mantate sitting in a global platform today talking about this because it gave, me a chance to grow. It gave me a chance to get to know other young people and, grow ourselves into, the people that we want to be in society.
Well, my next question about these steps and how you started this and the results that you've gotten right now, what steps can be taken to ensure that young people have equal opportunities to participate in governance, regardless of the social economical background? How can we start that?
I think with junior parliament, the first place, like I said already, that in a lot of instances, the people that make it into junior parliament are the people like me that are already so loud. I've always been that child. I express myself. I give my opinion. So you find that because I had a background in debate, public speaking, it was not as difficult for me to contest for office and be, elected to represent students in my constituency. but there are also amazing young people that are not as loud. You know, there are so many amazing young people whose way of expressing themselves is not necessarily standing in front of people and speaking. So I think one of the ways in which there's still more room, I think it's one of the biggest challenges right now that I would want to see kind of changing is, you know, giving space for young people that have different forms of expressing themselves to also find ways in which they can still make it. Because right now, what you're given is a topic, and then you speak in front of your school, and then you're selected, if you're selected in your school, to represent your school in the constituency. And then in the constituency, again, you stand in front of people and you speak, and then you're selected. So what about that child that's not as confident? So I think that's kind of the first thing that I would want to see happening. And then the second layer as well is this idea that for me, I lived in the second capital city in Zim. So I kind of had issues of technology. I had, you know, access to the internet to some extent. Students today that live in the city that have access to phones also have access to information online. So what that means is that in my term of office, I had so much more opportunities than that student that lives in the village and doesn't have as much exposure, or that student that lives closer to the city, so that if there's an opportunity in a different city, they are the first ones to be called, you know, because they're closer. So things like that. So it's issues of infrastructure, it's issues of access to information, it's issues of technology, and how they limit, you know, the participation of young people. So you find that Mantate can make the most of that experience and come out amazing, but there's another young person that goes through the same process and basically their life doesn't change. So I think it's just us continuing to reflect on how do we as alumni begin to advocate for kind of different ways of recruiting young people, but also building the capacity of those young kids in schools to also tell their stories in different ways. I think that would be great.
And when you talk about those skills and how you got prepared and what you share with others, how can young people be supported to develop the knowledge? Because sometimes we know how to do it, we would like to do it, but sometimes we don't have the skills. So how can we support young people to develop those necessary skills? Because you know, they are needed to participate in governance.
Yeah, I think two ways. The second one will actually take us into my next program, Generation Democracy, because that's kind of part of what answers your question. I would say that because we already have the structure, the junior parliament, junior council structure, I think for me, that's the first step, because it's an institutionalized structure. It's recognized by the government, by the Ministry of Youth, by the Zimbabwe Youth Council, and a lot of other stakeholders that work with junior parliamentarians and junior councillors. What we potentially might want to think about right now is how do we, as especially alumni, begin to feedback, because I think that's one thing that's been missing. Recently, the Zimbabwe Youth Council has started building a space or a platform for alumni to actually access opportunities post their experience in junior parliament, but also for them to feedback. So I think that's very important, because we are the people that went through the program. We saw where the skills are lacking or where we feel like there is more that could be done. Now that I'm out here as a young person that's building the capacity of other young people to effectively participate in democracy governance processes, I think it's me having the responsibility to ensure that I collaborate with the Zimbabwe Council, with Junior Parliament, with Junior Council, to build the skills of young people in, you know, in the sector that I'm in. I'm passionate about communications. I'm passionate about creative arts, you know, things like that. So it's me saying, I want to teach young people how to tell their stories. Someone else can come in and say, I want to teach these young kids, you know, how to do budgets, to do fundraising and different things. And then we can easily do that. But then I want to move to Generation Democracy, because I think in a lot of ways, the work that is done by Generation Democracy and the projects that I've been able to do under the network have a lot with how do you build the capacity of young people. So if you see on the screen right now, there are 3 posters. So these are basically some of the initiatives that I was able to do with a couple of, you know, young people from the network that also are from Africa, with the support of Generation Democracy. And one of the projects that we did, I remember, was on human rights crisis responses. So what we recognized as a group was, in Africa, there are so many human rights violations, you know, across sectors, not even just in issues of politics, it's issues of media, it's even in economic spaces, issues of access to housing, for instance. There is so much human rights crisis at different levels. So one of the things that we realized was, as young people, we don't have good understanding of these human rights issues. Yeah. And the second thing was, we also feel like we're not involved in the way that the design of human rights crisis responses are actually done. and there's a critical majority in our countries, I feel like we needed to be involved. So we came up with this designed project that basically sought to bring together young people from different parts of Africa, with young people from East Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. And what we basically did with that cohort of young people was we gave them context to the human rights crisis issues in different countries. And then what we said was go and find out more about this. When did it start? What is the state of things right now? And if we're looking at the next couple of years, if we don't fix this, what's that country going to look like? What's the continent going to look like? And then with that in mind, we also challenged these young people to say, if you're in the shoes of the African Union, what would you do differently to solve this crisis? If you're in the shoes of the United Nations or the government of South Africa or a political party, what would you do? At the end of that process, we then brought together those young people into an online space where we're like, can you share the experience that you kind of went through when you're doing this analysis? So they shared their experience, and then also they shared their recommendations, which we then compiled into a communique that we distributed to, the African Union, the SADC, and the other regional economic blocs in Africa, and also other international organizations. So I'm referencing that specifically because it was basically premised on the idea that young people are not involved in the design of human rights crisis responses. Maybe it has to do with the fact that we don't have the capacity. It also has to do with the fact that we are not in the spaces, but it also, could just be us standing up and saying we want to be involved. And part of us getting involved is us beginning to, analyze what is there and then submitting recommendations and saying if the African Union actually explored this, we could potentially work to, navigate the situation in this particular country. So that was kind of generation democracy through us young people in Africa, building the capacity of young Africans to begin to influence the systems that, impact on the state of human rights in the continent. And then the second layer of the project, which is something I'm very passionate about, and also because in my country this year, we're having elections. We did a project that was called the Gen Dem Think Tank. And the think tank was basically a space where we said we want to focus on Zimbabwe and Nigeria and talk about elections and some of the things that, limit the participation of young people. So for Nigeria, for instance, we talked a lot about the cost of violent elections, because you find that in a lot of African countries, Nigeria included, there's been a history of, very violent elections. And where elections are violent, you find that young people are not only the people that are affected by the violence, but they're also the people that perpetuate that violence. They are used in a lot of instances to propagate that violence, which is problematic because we're saying these are the same young people that need to safeguard their democracy. So we wanted to then bring together young people and begin to talk about violence and how it not just affects, the people that are there today, but it's us young people in the next couple of years. What democracy are we going to exist in? What governance systems are going to work in our countries? And then in Zimbabwe, we also talked about issues of technology, because over the years, we've seen a growth in the activism of young people, or the active expression of young people where politics is involved online. You find that because of this online agency, there is a general thought that, young people are involved, they're participating in elections. But we realized that it's not always the case. So we actually convened young people from Zimbabwe and said, is there a relationship between digital activism that we're seeing, which is exciting to see more young people participating? Are we seeing that translate to young people showing up on election day? Is it translating to young people going to register to actually be a candidate? It's showing up as young people participating in budget participatory processes, for instance. So it's all of those questions to say, how do we begin to marry this increase in, digital activism with actual participation in electoral processes? And I think those two were such powerful platforms for me. Well, because maybe I love elections, but it was such an eye-opener because there was so much similarity between Nigeria and Zimbabwe. Nigeria is going to elections next month. We're going to elections in July, but I'm already seeing what's happening there. And I'm like, I see my country in that country. I see the ways that young people are showing up, and I want that for me. So I think this was us kind of building young people's capacity to better understand politics and some of the ways in which we can show up to build better cultures in our politics. And the last element of that particular project was focused on, like I already said, digital technology is the future. Everything is online right now. Everything is kind of just, changing into the digital space. And one of the things that we did was we gathered young people and trained them on how to use technology in advocacy. So if it's a young person talking about issues of access to sexual and reproductive health rights, for instance, or young people talking about access to employment opportunities, if it's a young person talking about access to education that works in rural communities, things like that, we're like, how do you begin to use technology? So I think these are examples of how me as a young person with my friends from Africa, through the support of a network that works with young people, are actually showing up and building skills. So we're building the skills of young people 18 to 35, but it's the same thing that can happen for young persons that are under that age or people that are over, so that collectively we start to build agency, you know, and influence policy in a positive way.
And what's just one last question, Mantate, when you talk about digital leadership and digital literacy and cyber activism, right? How can youth participation in governance be made more accessible and inclusive for these groups? Because we know that right now everything is about technology and in the cyberspace, but sometimes, you know, it's not accessible.
Yeah, that's true. And actually in Africa, we don't have like many people. The number of people that access the internet compared to the ones that are not accessing the internet is actually lower. So you find that in a lot of instances, there are so many young people that are not online, but they're the young people that normally show up to vote, that show up for community meetings, that show up for certain things, but they're not online to access spaces like this where they can get to learn and expand on their knowledge and share their experiences as well. So I can't really say that I know how we can begin to bridge the gap, but I think some of the things that could be done, number one, is just the intentionality of government to improve infrastructure. You know, we've been talking about this for years. Technology is changing the way that we live, and our governments need to begin to invest in infrastructure that, you know, improves that access to internet, access to technology, but also looking at alternative ways of communication. We still have communities where radio is the main, you know, means of communication, where people access information through mainstream television. There are so many ways. There are rural kiosks now where people can actually go to a point and download everything without access to the internet, as long as there's that router in the area. So I think so many people are innovating, but it's not enough for Mantate to innovate because I'm not big enough to influence the whole of Zimbabwe. But if the government takes up lead, you know, Mantate does their own thing, someone else does their own thing, I think collectively we might be able to begin to see more young people, you know, accessing the internet. But then I want to say as well that the internet is not here to save us. So I don't think that we should also kind of make it like it's a savior. We all need it. There are people that are doing okay without, especially if it's by choice. And also, like, it's just saying that, can we build a world where with or without access to the internet, you can still access information that builds you to participate in your community? If I'm in the rural communities, what spaces are there? What mediums are there? There's, you know, different forms of art, you know, that can be used to communicate to people. So I don't think that it's just about access to internet, which is very important. It's also about alternative platforms that people are comfortable with, because for me to be online, I need to know how to use a computer. For me to be online, I need to know how to log onto Zoom. I need to be able to maneuver Facebook. Not everyone has that literacy. So we need to have considerations for like the different levels of, you know, literacy.
And we talk beyond technology and hard skills. I would like to ask you, since you have a lot of experience in this, how can the government and other stakeholders effectively engage with young people and incorporate their perspectives in policy-making processes?
Mm-hmm. I think they should ask us, you know, sometimes our governments begin to do things.
The right answer is ask us.
Yeah, like I'm the young person, I know what's good for me. I think
sometimes we as adults, we take projects, initiatives, and, you know, policy processes from the adults, you know, part, from the adult-centric part. But we don't ask young people, we don't ask them. And we think that everything is based on adults, but
they think they know what's good for us. And I feel like, I don't think that there's anything bad with elder people, you know, trying to contribute to how we grow as young people. But I think it should be the kind of space that also honors the fact that as a young person, I know what's good for me. I know what I want to pursue and see if it's good for me. So I think if the government can consult young people, and also the one thing I also want to say is, consulting young persons in Zimbabwe is not necessarily consulting Mantate, because my experience is not representative of the experiences of all these young people. I could have a bougie experience, you know, of something. I could have a very limited experience of something because I stay in a small community. There's someone else that is experiencing a world that's different from mine. So in consulting young people, it's very important to segment those young people. And this is
we have a raised hand here. Mauricio, if you want to share with us in less than a minute, please.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. Hi, my name is Mauricio. Thank you for this space. I was just wondering, you know, it happens everywhere in a company, when you're trying to get into governance, how as youth you can gain that space on the table, because normally there's a concept of politics and governance. It's for experienced people, it's for the same groups, for smaller groups, and the power remains. That's the thought on really small groups. So how we as young people can face that challenge of, yes, I have something to say, yes, I have something to contribute, and how to fight against those that resistance from the current people on the power, based on your experience.
Thank you, Mauricio. Tell us where you are heading us from. Mauricio?
Hi, say it again.
Where are you from, Mauricio?
I'm from El Salvador. I'm currently living in the United States.
Super.
Yeah, so thank you again for this space. And I'm a former student with Mr. Mike. So nice to see you.
It's good to listen to you. How can we assure spaces in public, policy making processes?
I would say that we need to also avoid the illusion that participating in politics is about running for office. Someone recently said on a different conversation that we need young people, we need women to begin to understand that participation comes in different ways. A good example would be, as a young person in my community, when there are elections, I need to participate. As a voter, it's someone that's encouraging my friends to participate. If there's a budget consultation meeting that is determining how much or the investment of council or government in that country or community for that particular year, I need to be in that space. I need to contribute. If I'm a young person that has tech skills, and I'm seeing a lot of, lack of accountability, how do I begin to use my tech skills to begin to build systems that ensure access between citizens and elected officials so that you ensure some form of, accountability. So it's me using my skills to participate. If I want to run for office as well, like I already gave an example of, I started this whole thing in high school. I was already in student government. When I finished high school, I did a lot of civil society work, voluntary work, professional work. And I think it's been building my capacity. And I think there are different ways in which we can grow. We can just invest in leadership skills, basic leadership skills, communication, the ability to work with people, the ability to collaborate, network, and things like that. So I know that this does not necessarily make it very easy to kind of just jump straight in and be in politics in your country. But one thing I can just say is that we should look at political participation in different ways. And then once we see that, it becomes a smaller, bit to chew. And then as you grow, you begin to, chew bigger pieces, I guess.
All right. Thank you, Mantate. Conrad says he or she's loving the conversation, a conversation I have an interest in. So please follow our discussion groups in the youthpower.org. And I'm going to send this to Bonnie because she has something for us too, Mantate.
Okay.
Yes, today we described this as a cafe, and we're doing something different this year because last year we heard from the input we got from people who participated is that there wasn't enough room and time for people to get to meet each other and talk together, which is part of what the community of practice is supposed to be about. So today we're going to give about 15 minutes. We're going to put you into breakout rooms, small breakout rooms. And we wanted you to be able to introduce yourselves, maybe talk about what's happening in your country related to this discussion we're having, any systemic change that's happening or that you think needs to happen, what approaches. Somebody asked, is non-participation participation? There's different things that were coming up. And we'll come back and we'll have about 5 minutes to hear if there's anything in particular that you'd like to bring back to the group. But we hope this will be an opportunity for you to get to know each other a little bit, discuss this, and then Mantate and Mike and I will sort of come in and out just to be able to listen or answer anything that you may have a question about. Not sure we have all the answers, but we'll try. So Stephanie, we can go into the breakout rooms and we'll be back in about 15 minutes together. Welcome back, everyone. I don't know, Mantate, Mike, I had one thing I know for sure is if we could go back to the slide, Stephanie, which I sort of had skipped over about how to join the community of practice up front, because several people who are on this is their first time joining and they wanted to make sure that they had the information. You will have access to these slides and the recording, but you can go on to youthpower.org, and through there, you can get to signing up for the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. And you will also see there are other communities around gender. There's a Middle East youth group. There's youth engagement, business entrepreneurship. So the registration page is just what Stephanie put into the chat room. So anyway, I didn't know if there's something in particular. There's a couple of things that came up in the group that I was in, but I don't know, Mike or Mantate, if there's just some big issues.
I had an amazing time with Tando, Mauricio, and Christina from Jamaica, from North Korea, and from Florida. So Tando is our presenter right now, if he wants to share.
Well, great.
Yes. Tando, the microphone is all yours. He's from Korea right now. It's very late in Korea. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Okay, can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So in our discussion, we discussed about how it is important that young people, they be given a legal framework of participation, because for them to step up, for them to be in those positions of influence, the bearers of power cannot sit power just like that. And no matter how brilliant young people can be, as long as there's no legal framework, as long as there's no youth quota system that assures young people to take up space in key positions in parliament or decision-making bodies, state-owned enterprises, it will be a mammoth task to expect young people to actually take up space. For example, in my country, in Zimbabwe, most of the political players come through a party system. And for young people to actually step up in that party system is actually a very big mountain. It's a mammoth task. They cannot just rise up to the echelons of power without, the economic power, etc. There have been a lot of members of parliament who have been in parliament for more than 10 years, for more than a decade. So for young people to actually rise to those leadership positions is actually a mammoth task. So what you talked about is that there needs to be a youth quota system. For example, in Zimbabwe, there is a proposal to, allocate 10% of parliamentarians to young people, but it's still a proposal. So we don't know when it's going to come into effect. So once there's a legal framework, once there's a statute that is binding, that allows young people to actually take up space, then the onus will be on the young people to actually choose competent young people who can actually take up that space. So it's not only about young people being good, young people rising up to the occasion, but it's also about some challenges that are hindering young people to actually take up that space. For example, as I said earlier, the economic power or the party system that is always favoring older and more experienced parliamentarians. And then Christina Black from Jamaica talked about that the young people in Jamaica are actually involved in governance issues. There's a youth parliament and also a youth advisory board. So they are actually involved in a lot of governance issues, but the issue of corruption is one of the challenges that is also hindering the influence of young people, or young people bring more options or positions of young people of rising up to the occasion. And then Maurice talked about the importance of technology for young people to actually be involved in governance issues. So at the end of the day, yes, young people can be brilliant. Yes, young people can do a lot of things, but nobody's going to give them the positions of influence on a silver platter. There needs to be advocacy to change policy in allocating or having youth quotas in different levels of government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tando. Tremendous summary of our conversation. Thank you very much. Oni?
No, you did a great job, Mike. We didn't organize ourselves to have someone do it. And we've only got like 1 minute left. So I'm going to say just something really quickly. And then if the other group, we talked about being really well prepared, how important it is for young people to be prepared in terms of trying to change the mindsets of adults and having researched the ideas you're coming in to advocate about, and picking achievable goals and staying in it for the long run, but always trying to find adult allies who get it and who can be there with you, I think is important. And I don't know if the third group had something, or the second group had something they'd like to just say very quickly before we do our last slide and end, so we can get people.
Yeah. Kate can say something for our group.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think just picking up on the idea of being at it for the long haul, because in our group, we talked about like private sector involvement as a form of participation and how that can contribute to some of like the goals of youth participation at large, like democracy, peace, and gender empowerment. I think that the private sector plays a very crucial role, maybe one that we sometimes neglect, but I think especially because I'm from Bangladesh, like it's kind of interesting, but Bangladeshi history, like the history of the country as a country is kind of, one of the stories of that creation of that country is students organizing, students who felt left behind, who weren't getting enough jobs, and who were feeling kind of disempowered because they weren't being allowed to speak their own language. Like the Pakistani regime at that time had wanted Urdu to be the official language, which would just put a lot of people out of the public sector entirely. Which is, I would say an optimistic way to think about my country, given the state of democracy there now, but it's still one that gives me hope. And yeah, I think being at it for the long haul, thinking about the private sector in a critical but inclusive fashion, but also I think sort of being international about it, right? Like, because in this space, we have people from so many different countries and people of so many different countries being in other different countries, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's really like, we can learn so much from one another, and the more we kind of engage, the more we can learn. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was great. And also Stephanie just put up in the chat about trying to keep the discussion going on social media through Youth Power Twitter. And so if you look in the chat, there's some ways to keep going. We can put up the last slide. Stephanie, that would be great. So this is, we used to have monthly webinars. We're not doing regular webinars. This was a coffee chat. We're going to be doing some other things like this. We will have a couple of webinars between now and the end of October. We're looking at some organizations that are run by young people that are making big advocacy and systems change. So we appreciate it. We hope you will look for the resources that will be shared after the event, and then visiting youthpower.org about these and other events. So yes, so we're going to Thursday, February 23rd. We will be doing another one like this, and we'll be I'm sorry, I take that back. On Thursday, February 23rd, the Gender Community of Practice.
Gender Community.
A coffee chat. And we'll let you know about our next one coming up, whether that will be just a spotlight or a coffee chat or a webinar. We'll be back to you. Mantate and Mike, thank you so much for leading the conversation. It was great to see so many new faces coming on, and we hope you'll stay with us and give us ideas and have your input with us, because this is a big issue about changing systems. We'll be here a long time, but we hope it'll happen.
I want to thank Mantate for her participation and collaboration with us. Thank you for our great speaking discussion today. And thanks, Stephanie, Bunny, and everybody. Thank you for your attendance today. We hope to see you in our next cafes or webinars. Please follow us on youthpower.org. Thank you, everybody. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.